Her hands were shaking as the guards raised her into the carriage. She was 16 years old. Court archives recall her as Consort Han, one of the Korean tribute women sent into the Ming palace, and she had just been surrendered to the Emperor of China. Her mother sobbed as she signed the document. She couldn't write, so she used an ink mark. One less daughter to feed, one less mouth in times of famine. Han journeyed for weeks in a sealed carriage alongside 15 other Korean maidens. They couldn't look outside. They couldn't speak to each other. One girl who tried to flee was dragged back with her hand crushed. She died of infection days later. Her body was left at the side of the road. The others learned the lesson. Resistance was not an option. When the gates of the Forbidden City closed behind her, Han discovered that serving the Son of Heaven had nothing to do with honor. She would live 16 years inside those walls. She would watch an entire harem disappear in a single night. She would plead to see her mother one last time, and she would die in white silk. Subscribe if you're new, and leave a like if you want us to keep unearthing these stories, because what comes next is worse.
Han's story began the way tens of thousands of others did, with a system designed to harvest young women like crops. When people think of Chinese imperial concubines, they imagine something graceful, beautiful women in embroidered silks writing poetry, a life of luxury serving the most powerful man in Asia. That image is propaganda. The imperial concubine system existed for over 2,000 years. During that time, tens of thousands of women vanished behind the red walls of the Forbidden City. And what most people don't understand is this. Concubines were not wives. They weren't considered human under imperial law. They were classified as precious objects, literally equated to porcelain vases. Every 3 years, imperial officials traveled through the provinces in what they called the Shu Nu selection. Sounds elegant. Don't be fooled. It wasn't an audition. It was a forced harvest. During the Ming Dynasty, no family was exempt. All unmarried young women of eligible age had to be presented. Hiding a daughter was a crime punishable by death for the entire family. Candidates were examined by eunuchs and palace physicians. They checked every inch of their bodies for imperfections, birthmarks, scars. Any defect disqualified them. Those who passed were taken. Families received minimal compensation, but refusing the money meant admitting treason against the emperor. The system didn't need to abduct. Poverty handled that. And what became of the families left behind? Most never heard from their daughters again. Letters were prohibited. Visits were impossible. On rare occasions, if a concubine rose to higher rank, her family might receive a small allowance. But for the vast majority, their daughters simply disappeared into the red walls. Some families held funerals for daughters who were still living because they understood the truth. The girl they raised was already gone. Han arrived in China as part of another tribute. Korea sent women to the Ming Empire as part of diplomatic arrangements. Between 1408 and 1435, more than 100 Korean women were sent to the Forbidden City.
Not as guests, as property. The day Han crossed the palace gates, she stopped existing as a person. She became a number, a possession of the Son of Heaven. But before she could serve, she had to be broken. The selected women didn't go straight to the harem. First, they passed through what the eunuchs called refinement, a process that could last between 6 months and 2 years. The first phase was identity erasure. They cut their hair, a mark of dishonor in Chinese culture. Their names were replaced with numbers or generic titles. They were forbidden to speak of their families. Mentioning their mother brought physical punishment. Any personal possession from home was seized and burned. The women slept in barracks, 20 to a room. They were woken before dawn. They went to sleep after midnight. For months, that existed in a state of exhaustion so complete that resistance became physically impossible. The second phase was submission training. The women learned dozens of different ways to bow. They practiced 8 hours a day. If a bow was poorly performed, they were beaten with bamboo rods on their legs. Many carried those wounds until death. They learned to move without making sound, to keep their eyes lowered, to answer without being asked, to exist without taking up space, to smile when they wanted to scream. One training manual from the Qing Dynasty lists 47 different rules for how to stand in the emperor's presence, 47 ways to exist in a single moment. Breaking any rule meant punishment. The third phase was preparation to serve the emperor. I won't go into graphic details, but historical documents describe a systematic process designed to erase any physical or psychological resistance. The women were examined monthly. Those judged inadequate were subjected to treatments that palace records describe with clinical coldness.
Palace medical files outline the procedure with chilling detachment. Notes from 1723 referred to candidates showing resistance and preparation protocols that required multiple sessions. The clinical language barely concealed what was being done to these women behind palace walls. Administrative records, official documents written as if they were discussing training horses. After months of this, the women who survived were considered ready to enter a world where their suffering had only just begun. After training, the girls entered the official system, and here began another form of hell. The hierarchy was ruthless. At the top, the empress, the emperor's only official wife. Below her, the imperial consorts, then high-ranking concubines divided into multiple tiers. And at the bottom, common concubines, sometimes hundreds of them, and preparation women, girls whose fate had not yet been decided. Your rank decided everything: the amount of food you received, the shade of your clothes, the size of your room, the number of servants, even the kind of dishes you ate from. The empress received more than 22 pounds of prime meat every day. A low-ranking concubine received barely 4 pounds, and often not even that, because supplies were stolen by corrupt eunuchs before reaching the kitchens. Many low-ranking concubines suffered from malnutrition. Their teeth fell out, their hair thinned, they aged decades in years, and the cruelest irony, their declining appearance made them even less likely to be summoned. It was a downward spiral built into the system. The emperor didn't visit his concubines, they were summoned. Every night, a eunuch presented the emperor with wooden tablets bearing the names and portraits of available women. The emperor pointed to one, and then the ritual began. The chosen concubine was taken to the bathing palace. Female eunuchs bathed and prepared her, but they didn't dress her again. They wrapped her in a silk blanket, like a package, only her face visible. Why? Because a clothed woman could hide a weapon. 2 eunuchs carried her to the imperial chambers.
They unrolled the blanket at the foot of the bed, and the concubine, without any clothing, had to crawl toward the emperor without lifting her eyes. And here's what almost no one knows. A chief eunuch remained in the room throughout the entire encounter, behind a screen but present. His job was to keep time. After exactly 30 minutes, he announced loudly, "Time to preserve the golden essence of the Son of Heaven." The emperor had to finish immediately. If he didn't finish in time, the eunuch would enter and physically remove the concubine. After each encounter, the woman was examined by an imperial physician who recorded every detail. Why? Because if she became pregnant, there needed to be absolute proof that the child was the emperor's. But here's what made the system truly perverse. Most concubines were never summoned. Not once, not ever. There were hundreds of women in the harem, sometimes over 1,000. The emperor might summon 1 or 2 per week. Do the math. A concubine could spend her entire life, decades, waiting for a call that would never come. Aging in silence, watching younger girls arrive, knowing that her only purpose, the only reason she was taken from her family, would never be fulfilled. And yet she couldn't leave, couldn't marry, couldn't have children with anyone else. She was property in permanent storage, with nothing to do but wait. The women turned on each other. The imperial harem wasn't just a prison, it was an arena. Hundreds of women all competing for the attention of one man, all knowing that a single pregnancy could change everything,
or ruin everything. The result was a hidden war that lasted centuries. Concubines poisoned each other's food. They bribed eunuchs to remove rivals from the selection tablets. They spread rumors meant to push other women out of favor. Historical records document cases of women slipping abortivations into pregnant rivals' tea. If the baby died, so did the mother's chances. Centuries before the king, the same logic already governed the palace. Empress Wu Zetian, one of the few women to ever rule China in her own name, allegedly smothered her own newborn daughter and blamed it on a rival concubine. That concubine was executed. Wu rose to become empress. This is disputed by historians, but the fact that it was believable tells you everything about the harem's culture. The violence wasn't always physical. Psychological warfare was constant. Senior concubines tormented juniors. Favorites were isolated and undermined. Alliances formed and collapsed based on who the emperor looked at during dinner. One account from the Qing Dynasty describes a concubine who spent 3 years pretending to be friends with a rival, only to testify against her when the empress launched an investigation into disloyalty.
The rival was reduced to servant status. Her children were taken away. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake, it was survival. In a system where women had no power except through the emperor's favor, destroying your competition was the only strategy that worked. The tragedy is that the system turned victims into perpetrators. Women who had been seized, trained, and stripped of humanity learned to do the same to others, because the alternative was being destroyed first. And if a concubine somehow survived the warfare and caught the emperor's attention, if she became pregnant, that's when the real nightmare began. Here's the truth no one expected. Getting pregnant was the worst thing that could happen to a low-ranking concubine. Common logic would say that a child of the emperor would raise her status, but reality was harsher. A pregnant concubine was isolated in the most distant palaces of the Forbidden City. She spent 9 months under constant surveillance. She couldn't receive visitors. She couldn't send letters. She couldn't walk through the gardens. And when the baby was born, it was immediately separated from its mother. If it was a boy, he was handed over to wet nurses and raised far from his biological mother. She could see him perhaps once or twice a year, supervised by eunuchs, without permission to touch him. If it was a girl, many times she simply disappeared. Imperial records didn't bother to record the fate of low-ranking concubines' daughters. There are documents describing women so desperate to escape this cycle that they secretly consumed abortive herbs. They chose risking death rather than bringing a daughter into that system. And if a son died, the mother was often blamed, accused of negligence, sometimes accused of murder. Even when children died of common illnesses, the mother could be demoted, exiled to distant palaces, or worse. One concubine during the Qing Dynasty lost 3 children to smallpox. She was accused of carrying poisoned karma and spent her remaining 40 years confined to a single room, forbidden from seeing any other member of the imperial family. Her crime was burying her children. Her punishment was dying alone. But as cruel as daily life in the harem was, nothing prepared the women for what happened in 1421. In 1421, Emperor Yongle had just inaugurated the Forbidden City. It was the height of his power. And then a rumor destroyed thousands of lives. One of the emperor's favored concubines was found dead. Officially, she was declared poisoned, but rumors said something else. They said she had taken her own life after an affair with a palace eunuch, and that the reason was the emperor's impotence. Yongle lost his mind. Humiliated, paranoid, he ordered an investigation. But he wasn't seeking justice. He was seeking to silence everyone who might know the rumor. In a single night, 2,800 women of the harem were executed. Not just concubines, also servants, cooks, laundresses, any woman who might have heard something. The method was death by 1,000 cuts, a form of execution designed to prolong suffering. The executioners were told to make it last. Some victims took hours to die. The screaming could be heard throughout the palace complex. Girls as young as 12 were included in the slaughter. Women who had served the palace for decades. Pregnant concubines. It didn't matter. Anyone who might have known. Anyone who might have spoken. By dawn, the courtyards had to be washed with buckets of water carried from the palace wells, the same wells where, in later years, so many women would choose to end their own. There is no official record of this event in imperial documents. The Ming court erased it from history, but the testimony of Lady Kui survived, a concubine who was outside the palace that night visiting a sick relative. She escaped the purge by chance. Years later, Lady Kui dictated her account to a Korean envoy. She described the screaming that lasted until dawn, the courtyards slick with blood, eunuchs dragging bodies through corridors she had walked every day. She named women she had known, girls she had trained alongside, friends who had shared her meals. Her testimony was preserved in Korean diplomatic archives where Ming censors couldn't reach it. It remains one of the only first-hand accounts of what happened that night.
Lady Kui herself didn't escape for long. When Emperor Yongle died 3 years later, she was among the women selected for accompanying sacrifice. Her last recorded words, "Preserved by the same Korean envoy, I survived the night of blood, only to die in silk." Han, the young Korean woman from our story, also survived the massacre. She was among the few who weren't executed, but her relief was short-lived. 3 years later, when Emperor Yongle died, Han was included in the list of women chosen for eternal honor. During the Ming Dynasty, there was a practice called shunzang, which means accompanying sacrifice. When an emperor died, his favored concubines were buried with him alive. The logic was simple and terrifying. The emperor would need company in the afterlife, and what better company than the women who had served his desires in life. 3 days after the emperor's death,